Power coming to the Korean region, joining the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier, now in port in South Korea, the USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike group. That includes a guided missile cruiser as well as destroyers. It's the first time that two carriers have been off of Korea since June. It comes of course, at a heightened time of tension between North Korea and the regional allies. According to the military brass today, meeting on the Ronald Reagan, these exercises are a strong warning to North Korea. And yes, that missile threat from North Korea being addressed in an aggressive fashion in exercises today off of Korea. Ships from the United States, South Korea, and Japan practicing spotting North Korean missiles as they come off of the North Korean coastline, just in case of further provocations, Bill.
Greg, you know, what more is Secretary Mattis saying on his trip around that region that is so important?
This is an important, it's a very important, Bill, warm-up trip for the President Trump Asia tour next month. He is now meeting with his defense colleagues in the Philippines. Some strong words actually coming from the new defense minister of South Korea. He says, and I'm quoting here, that the reckless provocations in North Korea must halt. It is leading that country into isolation and collapse. Again, Secretary Mattis goes on to Thailand and South Korea. And coming up next month, the 5-country Asia tour by President Trump. North Korea absolutely at the top of the agenda on most of the talks that he will.
Efforts to pressure Pyongyang, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson says a military option must remain on the table in dealing with North Korea's nuclear program. But he stressed that nobody wants the crisis to be resolved in such a way, and diplomacy is the way to go if possible. Noaram has the story.
Boris Johnson told a packed room at the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London on Monday that the North Korean government should change course and engage in diplomacy to resolve the crisis on the Korean peninsula.
By continuing to develop nuclear capabilities, Kim risks provoking a reaction in the region that is at once defensive and competitive, that reduces, not increases, his security and therefore reduces, not increases, the survival chances of their regime.
He also backed a series of commitments made by Seoul and US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to seek talks, making it clear the UK also did not want to bring about regime change. But he added that if needed, US President Donald Trump should keep the option of military action open.
I don't think anybody can conceivably want a military solution to this problem. And indeed, I know many who have studied the matter find it very hard to see how the nuclear solution, a military solution, might play out. I mean, that possibility must at least theoretically be maintained on the table, which is why I said it was the duty of any president of the United States, given the threat that his or her country could face from a nuclear-armed North Korea. It is the duty of the president at least to explore those military options and to keep them on the table.
The minister also stressed that existing UN sanctions on Pyongyang should be enforced and that China holds the key to reining in its provocative actions.
Seoul's Defense Minister Song Young-moo met his US and Japanese counterparts James Mattis and Itsunori Onodera on the sidelines of the ASEAN Security Forum in the Philippines on Monday. There, the 3 defense chiefs agreed to support trilateral efforts to address the North Korean nuclear issue through maximum pressure. They also recognized the need to heighten their military posture by continuing to hold trilateral, ballistic missile warning, and anti-submarine warfare drills in light of the regime's growing threat. Seoul's defense chief stressed, however, that South Korea does not want to engage in conflict with the North and that it was prioritizing a peaceful solution to the crisis. But he warned that if Pyongyang were to use military force on its country, South Korea would be forced to take strong action.
We understand the weight of engaging in a war as such. We would make all efforts necessary to resolve the issue in a diplomatic and economic way.
Tokyo's defense minister, in comparison, adopted a much tougher tone on Pyongyang for its recent provocations, including a pair of missile launches that flew over Japanese territory. Onodera sounded the alarm on North Korea's growing nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities and endorsed Washington's view to consider all options on the table.
The threat posed by North Korea has grown to the unprecedented, critical and imminent level. Therefore, we have to take calibrated and different responses to meet with that level of threat.
Other ASEAN ministers at the meeting also expressed concerns about escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula. They called on all parties to exercise restraint and work towards resuming dialogue for the peaceful denuclearization of North Korea.
Japan's defense minister is endorsing the U.S. policy that all options must be considered in dealing with North Korea's nuclear threat. It comes as America's defense chief meets with his counterparts in South Korea and Japan today, and ahead of the president's trip to the region. Senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott has the story.
The aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan making port in South Korea after a week of exercises involving fighter jets, helicopters, and 40 ships and submarines from the U.S. and South Korea. This amid a report the Air Force was looking to put nuclear-capable B-52s on 24-hour alert status, not seen since the Cold War. The Air Force says there are no immediate plans for that, but it must remain ready, as North Korea incites.
North Korea's provocation threaten regional and global security, despite unanimous condemnation by the United Nations Security Council.
Defense Secretary Mattis attending a meeting of regional military officials in the Philippines. The banned nuclear and missile programs of Pyongyang very much a concern.
The threat caused by North Korea has grown to a serious and critical level. Therefore, we are being forced to take a response to a new level.
China's role in pressuring North Korea remains key. It accounts for more than 90% of trade with Pyongyang. A topic of discussion when President Trump meets with Chinese President Xi during his own Asia trip next month.
He's got the power to do something very significant with respect to North Korea. We'll see what happens. Now, with that being said, we're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe.
The North Korean regime of Kim Jong-un striking back, its state news agency branding the president a lunatic, overheated with war fever. Some allies, however, think the temperature of the rhetoric from the White House is just right.
Given the threat that his or her country could face from a nuclear-armed North Korea, it is the duty of the president at least to explore those military options and to keep them on the table.
President Trump's Asia tour next month begins with a visit to Pearl Harbor to remember a past Pacific war amid efforts to head off a new
one. On this visit, Alex, an increased U.S. presence in South Korea for another round of war games seems to be increasing tensions in the region once again. What's the latest?
Well, yeah, when you send in an aircraft carrier like the USS Ronald Reagan, which with all its might, and plus it's flanked by 40 other warships and submarines, well, it's a sight to be seen. And Busan is now the port where the Ronald Reagan is docked, but a lot of people there aren't too happy about it. It's simply because South Koreans, for the most part, don't want a war in their neighborhood because they know that they would not be coming out on the bright side. Nobody would if North and South Korea go at each other. So some of the people in that area, have been protesting the U.S. ships that are there, basically trying to downplay it. And that's something that we've seen from South Korea itself as well. They've been trying to kind of deflate this rhetoric that's been going on between the U.S. and North Korea, and hoping to get back to the negotiating table and get something a little bit more peaceful-like in talks instead of this back and forth that we've seen. Now, as you mentioned, these exercises ended last Friday, but today a new set of exercises has begun for another 5 days of military saber rattling, as we like to call it sometimes, and that's exactly what's happening. So if you're North Korea at this point and you're seeing this, these exercises are right in your face because they're right next to you, and of course the rhetoric comes along with it. We heard from President Donald Trump in the past saying, totally destroy. Those were his words when it came to North Korea and what he's going to do, and then Pyongyang refuted with inches in darkness for the U.S. Now, we're not talking about two guys that are posturing in front of each other. We're talking about millions of lives at stake, and this type of rhetoric, as you know, is not helpful at all.
And as you know, Alex, these are exactly the kind of war games which North Korea continuously cites as the reason they pursue their nuclear program. The North has reached out to the United Nations about these military drills between the United States and South Korea. What can you tell us?
You know, we have to take a moment sometimes to take a step back and think, what is North Korea thinking? What is Kim Jong-un thinking? And the fact of the matter is that he's seen people like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein go down when the U.S. comes into your neighborhood. Now you have this very similar scenario here. I mean, yes, it's been a very long time, decades that we've seen these type of exercises between South Korea and the U.S. Basically showing their might in the neighborhood. But for North Korea, this is an act of aggression. This is in their face. So they actually went to the UN Security Council. They wrote a letter there basically saying that these joint military drills, we're appealing that they stop. We don't want to see this anymore because that's the reason we're building up our arms, because in a reaction to this. And you really need to think about this. If you're a country like North Korea, you're not some type of superpower in this world. So as Kim Jong-un, you're going to do everything to save your own butt in a world that right now is in the situation it is. And when you see somebody knocking at your door in that way, you're going to react in a way that's very defensive. So in many ways, that's exactly what's happening. Now, you have countries like Russia and China coming to the table. They're asking for something that's called a double freeze. So stop with these drills for the U.S. and South Korea, slow that down, and with North Korea, stop testing these missiles and trying to show off to say, hey, we can defend ourselves. That's China and Russia coming to the table. Sounds pretty reasonable. The U.S. says, we don't like that proposal. So as it stands right now, this could just continue, and hopefully it'll stay in terms of just rhetoric and maybe war games, if you want to call it games, instead of turning into something much worse. But right now, these war games seem to be a lot less helpful than helpful.
And assembling into units. To accomplish this type of mission, there are several actions taking place.
Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo agreed to coordinate efforts to resolve North Korea issues using not only pressure but diplomacy. They also vowed to maintain a high state of readiness against any further provocations from Pyongyang through continued combined exercises. Lee Eun-shin has the highlights from the tripartite meeting.
South Korea, the U.S., and Japan have kicked off their joint ballistic missile warning and anti-submarine warfare drills on Tuesday. The training includes missile detection and tracking exercises to enhance defense capabilities against possible missile launches from North Korea. The two-day drills carried out in the waters off the Korean peninsula in Japan are the fifth of their kind. On Monday, Seoul's Defense Minister Song Young-moo and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts, James Mattis and Itsunori Onodera, reaffirmed the need to up their military preparation by continuing to hold joint military drills against Pyongyang's growing provocations. The three met on the sidelines of the ASEAN Security Forum in the Philippines and committed to supporting trilateral efforts to tackle the North through maximum pressure. Song added that South Korea is still prioritizing a peaceful solution, but if Pyongyang were to use military force on its country, Seoul would have no choice but to take strong action.
We understand the weight of engaging in a war as such. We would make all efforts necessary to resolve the issue in a diplomatic and economic way.
Greg, you know, what more is Secretary Mattis saying on his trip around that region that is so important?
This is an important It's a very important, Bill, warm-up trip for the President Trump Asia tour next month. He is now meeting with his defense colleagues in the Philippines, some strong words actually coming from the new defense minister of South Korea. He says, and I'm quoting here, that the reckless provocations in North Korea must halt. It is leading that country into isolation and collapse. Again, Secretary Mattis, power coming to the Korean region, joining the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier now in port in South Korea, the USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike group. That includes a guided missile cruiser as well as destroyers. It's the first time that two carriers have been off in an aggressive fashion in exercises today off of Korea. Ships from the United States, South Korea, and Japan practicing spotting North Korean missiles as they come off of the North Korean coastline, just in case of further provocations, Bill. Of Korea since June. It comes at, of course, at a heightened time of tension between North Korea and the regional allies. According to the military brass today, meeting on the Ronald Reagan, these exercises are a strong warning to North Korea. And yes, that missile threat from North Korea being addressed